feel about sharing those data?
I'm pretty open about things. I like to share the right information with the right people. I don't just want it like stuck out on the web where anybody can access it, but I also feel like I would love for like new doctors in their residency to like be able to access it, to learn, to gain additional knowledge, or to like know how to treat the next generation of patients that like have symptoms like me. But do they need everything? Do they need like when I went to the dermatologist, do they need my OB stuff like for musculoskeletal thing? So I think it's the right information to the right people is what I want to try to chase. That's kind of where I'm at.
Hello, and welcome to Informatics in the Round, a podcast designed to help everyone become a part of the dialogue about topics in biomedical informatics. I'm Kevin Johnson, physician and informatics chair at Vanderbilt. I'm on Twitter at @KBJVanderbilt, and on Facebook, and on Podbean, which is where you can find this podcast, among other sites. I hope that little teaser gave you a sense of today's topic. It's only the most requested topic we've had so far. By the way, if you want to request something, either send it out to @KBJVanderbilt on Twitter, or go to Podbean and leave us a message under Informatics in the Round. Anyway, you asked for it, you got it. We have two of the world's experts on the topic of data privacy on the show today, Dr. Ellen Wright Clayton and Dr. Brad Malin. They're both colleagues of mine here at Vanderbilt and are incredibly generous with their time today. They had a lot of information to share with a very inquisitive and incredibly engaged group on this podcast. Brad and Ellen are a dynamic duo in the world of genomic privacy and have literally been thinking about this topic their entire careers. There is nothing we could ask them that they couldn't answer. Thank you guys. You were honest, articulate, and as always, incredibly smart. Our other guests included an amazing singer-songwriter duo, Alyssa Abler and Hannah Smith, also known as The Daily Fair. They were gracious enough to let us add their most recent hit song, that's what I'm predicting for them, to this episode. But even more impressive, they had a lot of stories and opinions to share about data privacy. As songwriters who tend to express emotions through their art, I wasn't sure how they'd feel about the leaking of private information. You'll enjoy hearing their thoughts about this topic, I'm sure. You'll also enjoy the song that we've stuck at the end, and the song that we play a little bit of in the beginning, as well as listening to their music at www.thedailyfairmusic.com. The intro to this episode featured a coworker and patient at VUMC, Bernadette Ruby, a senior learning experience designer and fantastic photographer from Vanderbilt. She has a very complicated medical history and is one of those people with a diagnosis so rare that everyone in medicine wants to learn from her. That comes at a price, as you'll hear. Finally, I was lucky to get Sarah Bland back on this episode. She was a firecracker. But then, when isn't she? Sarah, you rock, and you help us keep the conversation real. Thank you so much for coming on. What did we cover, you ask? De-identification, anonymization, HIPAA, by the way, not a female hippo, genomics, genetics, privacy, ethics, law, crime, minority report, and little white lies that some agencies can tell us. Yep, pretty much everything about this topic in some form. It was very, very, very informative. Okay, enough about the formalities. Hope you find this episode enjoyable.
So, I mean, that's pretty serious.
My side hustle, yeah.
Yeah. Now, so when you do weddings as a performer, or do you help to stage and organize them?
I used to do a lot of performing, doing the music and everything. But now I officiate. I can marry people off. So, couple of,
Cool. Well, more to talk about. We'll have to get into that. Hey, Alyssa, how are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Doing well. I'm Kevin. And where's Hannah?
Hannah's coming. She's grabbing something.
There she is.
There she is. Hey, guys. Oh, look at the shirt.
I know. Isn't that excellent?
Yeah. I was like, well, kind of fits with what's happening.
Yeah. Hey, Bernadette.
Oh my God, there you go.
Is that the Simpsons set?
It is the Simpsons set.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Okay, look, why don't I'm going to start this because I know we have so little time together. So Bernadette, since you're first, who are you?
I am a senior learning experience designer. I worked at Vanderbilt actually with Kevin for a little while, and now I'm at LifePoint Health. And I manage all the corporate training and leadership training, and I also am the subject matter expert on instructional design for the entirety of the organization for the 89 hospitals.
Yes, and you're a photographer.
And I'm a photographer and a videographer and a graphics designer and a multimedia person. Yes.
Yeah. Artsy fartsy, as we say. Let's see. Alyssa and Hannah, the Daily Fare. By the way, I'm excited to hear that you're Northerners.
We are from different parts of the North, but my name's Alyssa. I'm from Minnesota, and
I'm Hannah Smith, and I'm from, Canada via New York, but we've both been in Nashville now for like 9 years.
Yep.
Well, great. Ellen.
I'm Ellen Clayton. I've been at Vanderbilt for 32 years now. I am a pediatrician law professor in the Center for Biomedical Ethics and Society. And I work a lot with Brad and Kevin and Sarah.
Hey, Brad, who are you?
That's the question I ask myself every day.
And rightly so.
So I'm Brad Malin. By day, I'm a professor of biomedical informatics, biostatistics, and computer science at Vanderbilt. And by night, I co-direct a center of excellence from the National Institutes of Health with Ellen that focuses on privacy and identity as it pertains to our genetic information.
Let's see. That's everybody except me. I'm Kevin Johnson. No, Sarah.
Sarah Bland.
The world.
I'm just loving the new haircut.
Thank you. Yeah. I YOLO'd and said, why not during COVID? So Sarah Bland, project manager in biomedical informatics. I work mostly on the eMERGE project, which is putting genetic information into the medical record. And then also work on family history, putting that into the medical record, and with Consuelo Wilkins on health disparity research in precision medicine.
Thank you. And Sarah has been on a few of these because she's just so fucking funny. It's just there it is. She always pulls back, never says anything. So I'm Kevin Johnson. I'm a pediatrician. I am the head of the podcast, and I'm kind of the creative, geeky person who came up with this idea of a way to showcase some topics in a way that everybody who's not on this call and our guests can understand. The whole idea of this is for us to have a low-key conversation that is entertaining and edifying, and that's it. So today, I'm going to start out by slightly embarrassing Alyssa and Hannah, if I can make
Fabulous.
Challenge accepted.
Okay, here it is. Ready? And let's see now. Hold on. Wait. Did you guys hear anything?
Oh, there it goes.
So tell us about this song, which I love.
Thank you.
I went down to the river
And it's just as loud in real life as she is in this.
to wash away your sin.
The song actually on the side of a mountain driving.
But
to
no
Nashville.
amount of that sweet water
Really, really angry.
would do my bidding.
And basically super tired.
So
of
I went down to the
Linda
church
had brought this really
house,
crappy guitar along with us, and she was playing.
praying,
song.
Lord,
And
have
this is
him
basically
please.
me ranting and almost exactly
No
what we did.
amount
Wow.
of
We went and we shot it video on my family's former farm,
ever
and
did a thing.
it felt so suitable to the story I was telling. This was the first single we ever put out.
Right. Who did the video?
Our friend Tommy Stanley, who is also a local guy that we met
I
through.
pulled you down through the water
He did. He's actually done both of the music videos on our YouTube
like
page.
stone from the shore.
Well, as much as I hate to do this, I'm going to encourage everybody to look at this, but for now, I'm just going to say it's really amazing. And what I love is, so now you guys are not really Christian artists, right? Or are you?
We don't say that about our music. I don't. It's kind of we both profess faith.
I had a mentor once tell me, he was like, you can make a bigger impact in people's lives if you don't label it in certain ways. And so the fact that, you know, our own faith resides where it does, doesn't impact how we communicate with people and how we love people and how we tell stories.
Well, that's cool. That's actually an interesting segue for today. It's funny how that worked out. And I am going to play the piece that you sent me at the end for everybody to have a listen to, but I wanted us to know we're among some real honest to goodness artists here. You guys are fantastic. Your harmonies were amazing. I attempt to sing, but I would never sing in your presence because you guys
I bet you're great.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, right.
Thank you very much.
What I wanted us to talk about today is a very sensitive topic in some ways, but many, many people since we started the podcast have brought it up. In 1999, there's this guy named Scott McNeely who worked with Sun, who made a point of saying in a magazine, privacy, get over it. And it was kind of the beginning of this whole movement of people who have been more and more worried about their privacy, thinking that pretty much privacy is over. Pew Research Foundation did a study that said that, you know, somewhere between 6 and 10 Americans believe that there's no way not to have their identity tracked everywhere they go. And that that most people these days feel that their privacy is essentially gone. On the same time, you know, we've got things like the COVID pandemic where we need the data. We have research. Some people who have illnesses have data within themselves that might actually unlock the cure for their disease. And I know, Bernadette, you've had some issues in your health past, and I'm curious, do you feel comfortable talking about them and talking about how you feel about sharing your data?
Yeah. So I'm kind of in a unique space. I was born with what's called Klippel-Feil syndrome. And what that is the vertebrae in your neck should all function individually, right? But instead, like, they're deformed and they're kind of mashed together. So I don't have quite full range in my neck. When I was born, they hadn't figured out what it was, that it was tied to a gene. And now now they've linked all these other medical conditions with it. So I've also got missing and deformed vertebrae in my back. I've got heart murmurs. I've got digestive tract things going on. I've got springle shoulder. My legs are 2 different lengths. Like, I mean, like, if it's out there, I probably like have it as far as musculoskeletal stuff goes. I also moved 16 times in 18 years growing up. My father was military, and then he did government contracts afterwards. So not only do I have like encyclopedia volumes worth of information for my medical history, it's scattered all over the world, literally at hospitals. And some of those have closed, and some doctors have moved on to other things. And so trying to get a hold of those are kind of crazy.
So how do you feel about sharing those data?
I'm pretty open about things. I like to share the right information with the right people. I don't just want it like stuck out on the web where anybody can access it, but I also feel like I would love for like new doctors in their residency to like be able to access it, to learn, to gain additional knowledge, or to like know how to treat the next generation of patients that like have symptoms like me. But do they need everything? Do they need, like, when I went to the dermatologist, do they need my OB stuff, like for musculoskeletal thing? So I think it's the right information to the right people is what I want to try to chase. That's kind of where I'm at.
So Alyssa and Hannah, I see you guys nodding up a storm. How do you feel about all this?
So I have not a similar condition, Bernadette, but I had a very intense eye surgery back in 2013 to remove part of my iris because I had a melanoma in my eye. Yeah, and actually there were several doctors at Vanderbilt that while I was living here were monitoring it up to the time of the surgery. That's information I think is very just essential to have, but I don't know what else people may have of mine at this point.
Right.
Does that bother you?
I think I'm a bit of a realist, pessimist side person where I think that if you want that information, you're going to get it if you have the ability to do so. So I'm kind of the mentality that privacy is going to be very different the more technology increases. So I don't know if it bothers me personally, but I do think it probably has a greater effect on a lot of other people.
I'm curious. So Ellen and Brad, one of the things that you, and of course, Sarah, what you all have worked on at Vanderbilt has actually been trying to come up with ways that we can generate knowledge, actually learn from data without having a preconceived hypothesis. Typically, that means we want to get all the data from these patients in as much detail as they're comfortable giving them to us. Do you hear often this question of, I'm willing to let you have certain data, but not other data, and how do we deal with that?
So, well, I'm going to take a stab at it first. I think, first of all, it's important to know that a lot of data health-related data are used for research after they've had a lot of identifying data removed. And a lot of that is done actually with, at least at Vanderbilt, with permission, but without elaborate consent. And I think the tension that we run into here is that on the one hand, we can do a pretty good job of protecting an individual's identity in our big data sets, even in genomics, and do a lot of discovery with them. But to do that and really protect identity, we also lose the ability to go back and tell people what we find, at least about them personally. Right. And what we see a lot is that people want to have their identity protected, but they also want information back. And those two things are really they are in tension that really can't completely be alleviated. So we spend a lot of time talking about how do we tell people that we want information, that we want to use it for discovery, and that the goal is to do knowledge that's really going to help people in the future, we certainly hope. But the transitional part between the research and actually implementing it clinically is actually a step that has to be taken in a really thoughtful way. And you can't have both things at the same time. It's a process of translation from one to the other.
But, obviously there's people in the community who may have a lot of distrust because of that.
Yeah, this is a conversation I had just a couple of weeks ago as I was thinking about Tennessee and some of the laws that we have been seeing pop up or bills pop up. I'm in the LGBT community. I have a wife. And, that means that it could be used against me eventually for our insurance, for our ability to know more about what's going on with each other's care, if Tennessee wanted to enact any kind of discriminatory law. And so while privacy is really important, there's a lot of areas that it's been used against us in different avenues, like with minority populations. And so there's a lot of distrust in those populations. Consuelo Wilkins just put a paper out just a couple of weeks ago that talks about how African Americans really feel uncomfortable being a part of research studies, especially when the entire research team is white and when they don't really know if it's going to be beneficial to them. You have to think about that when you're thinking about handling data, that people don't really understand what that means necessarily. What does it mean that you have my data? What does that mean? What does it look like? Especially if they don't understand what the end result's going to be.
So Brad, Scott was wrong, right? I mean, privacy is not dead. You certainly, I am an executive at Vanderbilt. I'm gay, but I'm pretty willing to give my data to people for use in research. Should I be afraid?
Depends on what you think you need to be afraid of. Privacy is highly contextual. And so I wouldn't say that we're complete exhibitionists or have become voyeurs to the point where everybody's looking at all the information all the time and everybody's having all their information collected all the time by everyone. It's challenging to kind of tease apart what people are talking about when they're actually saying that their privacy is going away or that they don't believe in privacy. And one of the reasons is that privacy means many different things. And so if all we're talking about is what happens when information leaves you at all, then there are some challenges with being able to protect against the shedding of data on a daily basis. This doesn't necessarily mean that it's impossible to protect and that society doesn't want to have protection. It just happens to be that as we see new technologies get adopted and we see more people adopting those technologies specifically, that initially there's a expectation that the information is going to be there and we're going to do really great things with it. And then over time, I think there's this realization that we don't necessarily need to have all the information on all the people all the time. And that technology evolves and society evolves and new types of controls get put in place. And so even though you may have the ability to collect data, there may be ways of defending against it. And there may also be decisions that society makes that there are times at which we don't collect that information. And I think a good example of that in modern society is what's been going on over the last couple of weeks, where we've seen not necessarily a moratorium issued against face recognition technology, but the realization that this type of information collection and use is not necessarily the direction that our society wants to go in its current form. And so you not only have companies like IBM stopping their research into the technology, but you have a push almost congressionally, I believe, to have controls put on the technology.
Institutions like Vanderbilt, and actually all major research institutions and many others, have strong incentives to try to think about how to protect data. Because the last thing we want to see is that there's been a major data breach or something like that has happened. And similarly, I think that some of the really big companies are under increased, like Google and others, are coming under a lot of pressure and scrutiny because of people's concerns. And so I think that there will be, so I just want to amplify Brad's point, which is that we can talk about what's technically possible to do with World Enough in Time and all the resources that you could conceivably think of. But I think that it's also important to realize that people who are stewards of data, I like that word stewardship, that they better be really pretty careful about that. When I teach confidentiality to the medical students, I have a picture of somebody in a white coat, and then I put a picture of a black hole over their stomach. And I say, you know, basically, once you put this coat on, you become the black hole. Now, there are a lot of things, unlike a black hole, that get out of it. But your default position is, if you hear something from a patient, it stays with you, unless there's an excuse for it. And that's got to be where, and I think that that is a powerful factor in what we're seeing currently.
Yeah, I would agree with what you just said, Ellen. And I think Brad, I want you to kind of bring this item up. You talked to me a few weeks ago about HIPAA and what the issue with HIPAA is.
And what is HIPAA? I think HIPAA, you know, half the community thinks it still has 2 P's in it. So
right. It's not a female hippo.
I've never heard that.
Well, it's also, as a lot of people think, it, you know, sometimes they refer to it as a 4-letter word, but it's a 5-letter acronym. You know, it's the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act of 1996, which is actually quite intriguing because it was brought forward to try to standardize all of the collection and sharing of information used in the context of health insurance payments. But it then eventually evolved to have its own privacy and security rule associated with it, which is really actually quite intriguing because when HIPAA first came out, Bill Clinton was the president of the United States, but there was no privacy or security rule. And then they tried to get it passed within Congress. It didn't pass. And then after he left, everybody said, well, that's going to be the end of privacy and security. It's never going to happen. It turned out that when George Bush came into office, he ended up being a pretty strong proponent for medical privacy, which was quite surprising, to the point where he basically said that if Congress couldn't get it passed, that it would fall to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services to promulgate a rule, which ended up. That's what happened. But it's interesting because you ended up with Congress setting the law, and then you have HHS setting these rules, and at times they're in conflict with one another. And mainly because they came out of 2 different groups. Policy and law is an interesting thing, right? It serves 2 purposes. On one side, it codifies the expectations and the beliefs of society, such that it says, like, these are the boundary conditions, you know, and we all agree that these are the boundary conditions, and if you violate them, then we have the ability to ostracize and penalize you in whatever way we see fit. And then there's the flip side of it, which says that we also know that there are markets that govern society, and that if the markets have the ability to get out of whack, then we set policy and we set law to try to create some type of a level playing field or reorientation of the market to ensure that it doesn't exploit all of the individuals and the companies within society. And the unfortunate part, though, I think with HIPAA is that it meant well. The privacy rule meant well in that it really tried to say that there were rights that individuals had with respect to their data in terms of, you can request an accounting, you can get access to information. Unfortunately, I also think it created loopholes with respect to data specifically. And one of those was that they created this definition of de-identified information, which, to be honest with you, I think is one of the worst words ever created, because when you think about it, it's de-identified. It's 5 syllables. And that is just way too many to try to describe what is a principle by which we use to manage all of our health information. But basically what it says is that if you de-identify the information, then the individual to whom the data corresponds has no rights with respect to that information. And the organization that collected it can do whatever they want. And in particular, what's happened is that we've seen I don't know if it's become multi-billion, but it's definitely close to it in terms of a market for the sharing of data about health data about individuals. Now, there's questions about whether or not it's readily identifiable, and hopefully it's not. But it's not a market that should probably exist. And so this is a really strange situation, because now people, when they argue about privacy, sometimes they're talking about confidentiality. They're saying, I'm concerned that somebody's going to collect information without my permission. But then there's also this complication in that people believe that there's intellectual property, and they relate that to privacy, and that's information about me, and you're going to commercialize it and I get nothing out of it in return. That's a violation of my rights, and you violated my privacy in order to get that information. And this conflation of these two ideas, I think, becomes problematic. But the way that we've set up law in the United States, I think, has created a situation where it's become difficult to tease these apart.
So Bernadette, as one of the people who's got a lot of information out there and don't want it all disclosed, how does all this make you feel? What does it make you think about?
It gives me a little anxiety, because like I said, kind of towards the beginning, I want to get the right information to the right people. The idea that anybody can just go in and grab whatever they want doesn't seem fair. I mean, like, if you're counting how many people have COVID, like, I get the necessity to, like, quantify that and see what the spreading of those numbers are. But, like, my health concerns and, like, situations are so unique that even if you strip my name off of it, the physicians that have worked directly with me would still be able to know, oh, I've seen that case before, I know who that is. It's not like I'm just like every other person walking down the road. And so, like, I think that, like, I think in most circumstances, I think that, like, it would be easy to de-identify it, but, like, I'm not one of those. So, like, I mean, in a prime, for instance, somebody de-identified my medical record, specifically on my spinal surgery, and it landed in a medical journal. And my surgical person, my surgeon, found the article and said, "Did you approve this?" Because he did the surgery, he didn't even know that it was out there.
Wow.
So, I mean, the idea of, like, and that's what's interesting, is because it was such unique surgery, and I'm super unique, that it was still identifiable, even though it was de-identified.
Well, both you and Alyssa have the same problem. I think ocular melanoma is not the most common thing I've ever heard of.
Before the surgery was done, she had to agree it would be in a medical journal.
Really?
Yeah.
I don't know if they required it. It was strongly encouraged, but I was happy to provide that because it's such an
Hers was the longest documented case they had ever seen.
Mm-hmm.
Jeez.
Yeah.
Well, Brad and Ellen have been recently trying to help us realize, like, exactly what you guys deal with, the issues around how much data about COVID can an institution share without it actually really not being de-identified.
COVID, let me take a step back for a second to address something that Bernadette said first before I forget it, which is that I believe the majority of people in the world are an N of one in terms of that.
What
their
does
combination
mean? What's
right?
N of one mean?
Yeah, the combination of conditions and demographics about the individual is likely to uniquely represent them in any place they go. And the extent to which an individual is going to be recognized within the data is partially dependent on two things. One, it's dependent upon how they present themselves within the world, and also the knowledge that people have about them from the outset. So the fact that your clinicians or your docs would know you, that's an expectation. It's an expectation because they've been exposed to something that was sensitive about you in an intimate manner, and you let them in at that point, not right. And so then there's the question though of I'll be honest, if I had looked at your medical record, I would have had no idea that it was you, unless you had had a conversation with me to explain these things to me. And this is why I say that these issues become very contextual, right? There are times when people know things and they can exploit them, and then there are times when other people are not exposed to that information can't. This relates pretty strongly to what's going on with COVID, in that one of the things that we've seen is that it's quite a unique phenomenon, in that a lot of people have felt the need to tell everyone that they're COVID positive. And it's really crazy because this doesn't happen with a lot of other clinical phenomenon. It does happen for some people, but for some strange reason. I don't know if it's because people are searching for camaraderie or they believe it's a badge of courage, but this notion of disclosure has created a situation where people say, look, I tested positive, or I even tested negative, which has its own implications. And then once they say that, once you reveal this information, you're making yourself part of a club. And it actually would make it easier for me to recognize you within one of these data sets, because now I see, okay, well, I look at the demographics for this person. If there's only one person with those demographics, when I go look at data that Vanderbilt has shared, if they're the only person with those features, then I go, oh, that was John Prine, right? That there's a perfect example. But then you have the situation where if somebody doesn't disclose, right, but the information is made public that there was somebody who was positive, and you reveal the factors about that person, all their demographics, then there may actually be a lot of people who are out in the community that might look like that. And this is not an encouragement to tell people to not be public about what's happened to them, but it's an example of how this type of disclosure ends up making it more difficult to actually protect people's privacy. And so when people take it upon themselves to be open, that's totally within their right to do so. It's just that it has downstream ramifications. So when you're trying to create a data sharing model that says, well, I want to put COVID-19 data out into the world, you have to think about the implications of this, and that if all I was to share was information about COVID-19 and you have chosen to self-disclose it, no problem. If, on the other hand, I'm going to share the entire medical history about this individual, in addition to the fact that they're COVID-19 positive.
Which is what we need, by the way, to help develop therapies.
Right, but lots of things can get caught up in that. So it could be that the individual had a sexually transmitted disease, or that the individual had an indication of some type of abuse that they committed or other people committed against them that wasn't necessarily made public, but was documented within the medical record. This is where the collateral damage really starts to come into play. So it becomes a balancing act, though.
I want to jump in here and just make a couple of points. One is that we need to be clearer as we collect information and as we are getting ready to share it. I mean, particularly in some of these programs that have consent at the front end. One of the things that we may want to consider is telling people that, if they go out and talk about their condition, or that they've had COVID, or they have whatever, that potentially makes them more identifiable within the data set. But the question that I have about that is, so then are you saying that people who do that kind of self-disclosure, which they do for a lot of reasons, for support, for many things, does that mean that they somehow are assuming the risk that they're going to be re-identified? Clearly, that's a problem.
Or to take that to another level, had the police here been allowed to let people to have access to COVID positivity for people that they might arrest, was that a way to actually compromise the electronic health record in kind of a weird, subversive way?
I'd like to take a stab at that.
Since we wrote an editorial saying that the police shouldn't have access to COVID data, I feel pretty strongly about that. On the other hand, the other part of the solution has got to be thinking about how to prevent uses that adversely affect people. If information about them comes out, you can't consent to adverse use. That's not okay. What we have to do is realize that fixing adverse use is part of the problem and part of what we have to be dealing with. That's not particularly within the purview of the medical profession,
Right.
but it sure is within the purview of us as a society.
Very much like me using Alyssa and Hannah's songs without their consent.
Yeah.
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 So,
I would like to point out that my background's public health. And so what I've thought about as far as, the COVID data is that people are willing to disclose for the greater good. They recognize that in public health, there comes a point in time where disclosing this information and letting people know so that you can prevent the spread is helpful. Like wearing a mask, it's not a political thing. We do that also on the back end with STIs. We report to the state how many STI infections that we see so that they can monitor if there becomes a spike in chlamydia or a spike in herpes in the state for the greater good. Makes sense. Public health has been doing this for a while, but I think it goes back to the intent that if the intention is for the greater good, that's one thing, but 23andMe selling data to pharma, is that really the greater good?
So I have refused to do the test. I'm like, here's the truth. If anybody in my family should figure out our genetic situation, it's my parents, not me. So since I am the product of my parents, if they want to do it, they can do it. And therefore, my genes are still trackable. That for me is just a personal choice. I'm open. If someone asks me my medical history, I'm more than happy to tell them. But I did used to work in the medical field, not as like a scientist or anything, but I was the one collecting all the data from the patients, all the very, very personal information. And because I am a personable person, people were more willing to tell me that stuff. And then, I'm not going to lie, don't sue me. There are some things I would not put in their records simply because I did not think it was anybody's business to know this. It felt like farming information.
That's
and it felt so wrong to me. I don't want to do a 23andMe because I just know that's a possibility. And I do not care for that. That's not something I'm giving permission for.
So you remind me of the guy who fills out our taxes, because every time we fill out our 1040, he says, why are you filling in things like, let's say, how much money you've put into dependent care when you make too much money for you to get anything back? That should be null. And my view of it is, it's just a number. And he's like, it's information they don't need. And on the one hand, that makes sense. But now if you're trying to figure out a cure for Klippelfeil or trying to figure out whether there's some epigenetic, which basically means things that happen after you're born, reasons why the disease could be better or worse, you're censoring the information. So you're actually making it harder for me as a researcher to try to find potentially associations between, subtle findings that you may not think or I may not think are relevant, but that it turns out when you mine the data of every single patient, they turn out to be interesting.
You're getting me riled up, Kevin.
I'm trying to.
No, I've got stuff coming to you. I'm like,
a good example is like with
I
COVID
completely understand what you're saying, but there still has to be a volunteer level, like an understanding, like you're talking about the black hole. The doctor becomes the black hole. Well, at some point, there should be a conversation on one side or the other saying, hey, I just want you to know because of these things, I would like your permission to be able to use that. I think it might be relevant at some point.
Also, not everybody wants to go into the black hole, right? And,
Yeah.
and if they think they're going to get sucked into the black hole, they'll start taking evasive maneuvers, which is that they'll stop telling people things. And they'll stop telling their clinicians things. And that's
Bernadette's pointing at herself. Go ahead.
I go to the doctor, and if I get like this laundry list of 6 pages that I'm supposed to fill out, and all I'm going in for is a cold, I'm not giving you a whole medical history. Like, I am that person. I'm like, no, you really don't need to know all that. I'm like, yeah, I got a heart condition, so like, let's not prescribe like some medicines, but I'm not going to write everything out. There's no reason why a PA at a walk-in clinic needs to have my entire medical history. I'm just like, I'm not going to spend the time doing it, and there's no need for them to know that.
So as somebody who does research with medical records in a retrospective manner, one of the things I tell my students is that when you see something in the medical record, you might be able to trust that. If you don't see an indication of it, chances are you would have no idea if they failed to have a diagnosis or if it was just not reported. And you have to be really careful when you start looking at records this way. But this notion of evasive maneuvering, on one side, I believe that individuals have the right to hold back information. And this is the fundamental notion of privacy, which is the ability to control information about oneself. And if you so choose to do so, then that's your right. Now, if it has the potential to infringe upon the well-being of others, this is where I think that we might start having potential conflicts between individuals' rights and societal rights. And so if this is information that, as Bernadette has pointed out, like if she withholds this information, if she's only hurting herself and she recognizes that, I'm not saying that you are trying to hurt yourself, but
yeah, right.
It did turn that way. In many respects, that's her prerogative. If I withhold information about the fact that I'm COVID-19 positive, I walk out into the street and I start touching every single person that I come across, and then I don't tell them, that's a problem, right? And that is where individual rights may actually start to break down.
I just think there needs to be like a level of permission. Like the idea that like my medical stuff showed up in a medical journal, like I would have been happy to say, yeah, go for it. Like people need to learn, let's like learn from each other. But like, I would have liked at least the courtesy of, hey, we'd like to do this. Would you be okay with? Right. And so I don't know. Yeah.
I'm actually pretty surprised that they didn't ask for your permission. I mean, because that's really pretty common. That's really pretty common these days.
They got a pretty good hand slap.
What?
I said they got their hand slapped.
Yeah,
So.
well, I'm sure they did, but it's that's really pretty doggone uncommon. I mean, one of the things that makes this level of permission difficult is that for the last several years, it's been a requirement from the NIH that if we get funding and collect data about patients, that they have to agree not only for whatever it is that the research is about, but that anybody in the future can use it as well to study any other problem. There are a few exceptions to that, but really not very many. And it initially started in the area of, genetics and genomics. But there's a proposal that was issued last year that would actually make a condition of any NIH funding, that any data that we get, and it's not only, the stuff that's in your medical record, but I would think, I do a lot of social science research, as does Brad, and I ask people stuff. Right now, we're asking a whole bunch of LGBTQ people about what they think about genetics research. We've interviewed 31 people. We've gotten a huge array of opinions about what they think's good about it and what they think's bad about it. You'll not be surprised to know that there's a big array, but there's, huge interest. And actually what they mostly say is, we're so glad you asked us because nobody's asked us what we think about this. But the idea of this sort of broad consent for data sharing that's now virtually a requirement of getting funding, is a big issue for us. Among the things it's going to require is even greater care and stewardship by the data holders and the researchers.
Do you think most patients know that there is this mandate that we have for data sharing?
Hell no, boy, no. Come on.
It's a consent form.
No.
Not that anybody reads those things, but
I'm not convinced that all investigators understand it either.
Yeah, I was going to say,
So,
most patients don't know.
Right, and devil's advocate for a minute, how many people walk in with a 6th grade reading level or speak a second language and don't even read the form, but they realize that they're supposed to sign the bottom? Like, how are we double checking to make sure that they're getting the care, like that they're understanding the documents that they're signing and that they're being explained to, like, and like the implications of what that is? I
was at the doctor a couple weeks ago, and the lady said to me, I heard her say it, Dr. Johnson, there's a form here you have to sign. So I felt like I understood everything. I'm kidding. Brad's like, really?
How do we get him to be taken off this call? And we'll just all continue.
I will say that one of the times that I went recently, because was involved with developing the consent process for our de-identified genetic database, that one of the recent times I went to the doctor, they not only did not give me the form, they gave me one of those little things like you sign at the Kroger, you know, and there's just a line for your signature that says, I acknowledge that I've read this.
That same thing happened to me, and I've straight up, because I've done this, I just wanted to know, because you can ask. I went up and I said, can I please have the printed material to read this? Because
Did they have a copy? Did they have it for you?
I tell you, it takes people back. Like, you can't just offer somebody to sign their life away to you when you really have no idea. You know, they always say, my mom is a stickler for it. Always read the fine print.
Yeah.
And I'm finding so often, because we have talked about this with quite a few people, that they've never, ever read the consent forms.
Right.
So there's a great study. There's a great study that Alicia McDonald and Lori Craner had done almost 15 years ago, that looked at how many end user licensing agreements or terms of service you come across on a daily basis while browsing the internet or using your phone. And it was found that if you took the time to read all of those documents, it would actually be more time than the actual minutes that exist in a day. So all the things that you do in the day, you literally cannot read it all. It is impossible. There is a push to try to simplify this, but it is, unfortunately, when people call these privacy policies, what they really mean is that they're cover your legal ass type of policies for these companies, and that they're not really designed to be in the interest of the individual. They're designed to show the point at which you sever your responsibilities with respect to that person, or when you've proven that they've signed away things to you. Like I said, that's always the case, but
yeah, well, and there's a large fear I've also found with people who sign it out of fear for not being treated. What do you do if someone doesn't sign it, you know?
Yeah, and I mean, your point being that there are people who are legitimately sick. I mean, it's not like they can either see well or control themselves well, but the forms are sequenced in a way that you really only get one shot at it, and it's before you get care. It doesn't have to be that way. Many places will bring the forms in during your visit or wait until somebody else can come and explain them. I will confess that now that we've gone electronic, it gets a little trickier because these systems have hard stops, which means if a form's not signed, you often can't go to the next step in the care process. Whereas in the old days, they would have skipped it and they would have brought a clipboard back to you and said, can you please sign these forms, and you get a chance. So I have to ask another question. I know we're not going to have a ton of time. I wanted to cover this. I noticed that you guys are not, so I'm looking at Elise and Hannah now, not all that comfortable with 23andMe. And that means that you might possibly have some concern about genetic data being even more of a problem. Is that a fair statement?
We have differing opinions on this.
Oh, do tell.
Somewhat.
Pray tell.
Yeah.
Do you want to go first? So I'm a much less private person.
Okay.
Than Hannah is, and actually we're not. We've been in a band together for 10 years, almost 11. So we've lived a lot of life together. We're not together, and a lot of people just assume that we are, which is always really interesting because we're each other's emergency contacts. We do go to each other's doctor's appointments if they're of a certain like seriousness or whatever. All of our immediate family members pretty much live out of state, so we are basically, for all intents and purposes, each other's domestic partners. So there is a certain level of trust that's been built up over time. Now with the 23andMe stuff, I don't have a lot of things that I don't care, that I feel people shouldn't know about me. I'm pretty open book.
Bernadette, how about you?
I don't know. I'm kind of torn on it. I feel like, and maybe this is just my ignorance, it's that like when you get down into that genetic level, it's not like my bone deformities where like somebody could recognize it like from one strip of DNA to the next. When somebody's just looking down a sheet of it, like, are they really going to know who it is? I guess my concern would be is like negative usage of it later down the road. So like they want to come after me because I'm the cure for something that like, that would be like the only thing that I would have any real hesitancy towards it. It's like, is there any real reason to fear it? Like, is there going to be an adverse, or could there be an adverse?
I have to say that of all the things about me that are out there, or that might potentially be out there, I actually usually, when I do this, do a slide, and I have genetic information and my social media stuff, and I don't know how many Google hits there are of me, but a lot. I've written a lot. I've been, at the end of the day, I am less worried about my genetic makeup than just about anything. I mean, and the truth is, there are some things about my genetic makeup that I don't want to know. And so it would provoke me if someone else found out and told me about them.
Just watch too many sci-fi movies.
No, I think the future has yet to be completely written in this regard. I don't believe that we know all of the potential uses of genomic information. I think people were expecting it to be much more fatalistic and deterministic than it has actually become. But every day there are new studies, there are new association studies. I worry that there will be misappropriation with respect to genomic information, in that it will be used in studies that are not used necessarily against the individual, but against groups of individuals. I believe there was a really strange study that came out of UK Biobank and 23andMe last year, looking at the relationship between genomic variants and an individual's sexual predisposition. And it was such an unbelievably flawed investigation that it made you really worry about how people are trying to use genomic information to give storylines and potentially societal shifts that I don't believe should occur. But the other issue that I'd point out here with respect to individuals is that I think people should recognize that, at least in the US, we do have law that is designed to be preventatory with respect to discrimination based on genomic information. However, it's a law with a lot of holes in it, but it is a recognition, at least, that there is something to be protected for individuals. Whether or not you have to worry about things that go bump in the night, the way I look at this is that if people are going to find ways to take information and use it against you or against society, or try to use it for insurance-related purposes in the future, it will be done. And so it's just a matter of, to what extent can we actually get a handle on it?
Well, that really goes back to the point that I made earlier, that at least part of the solution is to figure out what rules we need to do to govern use. Because, people will try to hurt other people. I mean, we see this on a daily basis. So, but I think our obligation is to try to figure out how to control that and how to try to prevent those misuses.
Can one of you just tell everybody what the message was from the UK study, so that, because we have 4 LGBT people here, they want to know the answer?
Short version was that they were trying to show that there were genetic variants that were indicative of sexual predisposition. And so, in terms of saying that you were born this way, right? And that it's not so much a nurture issue, it's a nature issue. And the problem with this is that we know, all the research has shown, it's a much more complex situation, right? You can't reduce it simply to genetic code that says that you're gay or you're lesbian or you're queer. It's not black and white in that regard.
Well, not only that, they defined the group as whether they'd had one same-sex experience in their whole life or not.
Ever, right? Ever.
So that
which was crazy. I mean, come on, Sarah's not going to say it. I'm going to say it. I mean, come on, who hasn't?
Come on, everybody has.
Okay, show of hand. No, I'm just kidding.
Take a poll.
I didn't sign my form. You can't see my hand.
Hey, Ellen, I know that you have...
Look, I see Daniel Craig walk out of the water, and I'm just like,
Bernadette, what's the difference between genomic and genetic?
Don't know.
Hannah, Elisa, any idea?
Is genomic the actual code, and then genetic is your how it presents?
Heritable relationship.
Yeah.
Precisely right. But a lot of people get confused by it, and they use them interchangeably, and they don't mean the same thing.
Sarah, any final words?
I go back to the comments that I made about intent. I think, the Golden State Killer is a great example of privacy. That, sure, it's great that guy was caught, but do we want law enforcement to have all of our information, like what happened in Tennessee with COVID data going to the police or the law enforcement departments. I think it goes back to intent. And if you don't know what a company's intent is, you start to feel a little uncomfortable with that data being out there.
I think the Golden State Killer case, I wish we had more time to delve into this, is one of the scariest precedents that has been set within our society in a long time. Because short version of the story was that you had millions of people who were taking their 23andMe results and other sequencing results and putting them into an environment where they could look for people who were relatives. And it was done behind closed doors. You had to create an account and get in there. And then the FBI ended up taking DNA from a cold case. I mean, many cold cases. The guy had killed a lot of people. But they took DNA that they didn't know who he was, and they put it into the system, masquerading as if they were him. And then they ended up finding a third or fourth cousin that they then went to and then reconstructed the family tree for, and then started asking all these people within the family, hey, did you have a weird guy who was in your family who was living in California at this time? And then eventually they found him by asking around and then eventually getting there. And then they arrested him, and he was found guilty in court based on this information. It was the first time that direct-to-consumer genomic information was ever considered court admissible. But the fact that the FBI had masqueraded as this person, I was completely taken aback. I thought that this was actually misrepresentation. It would be considered fraudulent. And it turns out, after I talked with a constitutional lawyer on this, that it's fully within the FBI's rights to do this if they believe that they're going to be able to catch a suspect. Because what it means, and so when this happened to the company or the group where people were putting their DNA for this purpose, when they went back and the company asked them, said, hey, are you okay with this data being used to solve violent crimes? Please let us know. Less than 10% of them actually agreed to it. Right? Some people thought this was fantastic. They're like, you're going to find killers. And then there's this guy standing on the side that says, yeah, in your family. And it's like, but a lot of people were just saying, no, this is just.
Yeah, because where does it stop? I mean, I want crimes to be solved. I mean, we've heard about all these rape kits that sit and never get tested, but I'm sorry, we are living in a current state where we're realizing that law enforcement policies have to have some changes. And I'm sorry, but I don't trust that law enforcement offices aren't going to say, ooh, how can I, put something on them for a traffic stop? I mean, I really, especially if it generates revenue, I don't take solace in thinking that they'll do the right thing.
Bernadette, any thoughts?
I think it's good to solve the cold cases, but I mean, to what extreme? I mean, I think and this is a whole tangential thing, but them trying to crack into the iPhones and pressuring Apple to release a back end. I mean, how far are we going to let that be pushed? In a lot of arenas, I don't think it's just in healthcare.
It's funny. We were reading the article that was sent, and I just kind of shouted out. I was like, this is like Minority Report. Do y'all remember that movie where it's like nearly jumping to conclusions? I actually had already had the thought. I was like, wouldn't it just be convenient if when babies were born, if we just took their genes and just kind of ran it through the system, then we always had it. And then I was like, that is such kind of an evil thought to have, that from infancy, we're tracking whether or not this person is committing a crime. And
or whatever.
I mean, it just, again, I watch a lot of sci-fi, so my brain is constantly going through the possibilities. But where do you draw the line? We already maybe don't have enough lines drawn.
So Brad, as we've got to close, these are really great. Brad, if somebody's listening to this and they're freaking out and they just want to know where you can go for truth in terms of what's the risk, should I or shouldn't I, where would you send them?
Airland.
Under what the problem is under what conditions. If it's about privacy in general, I would say one of the better resources is the Electronic Frontier Foundation or the Electronic Privacy Information Center, EPIC. I think both of them do a really good job of collating information about potential threats as well as policy and technology that people are creating to try to instill protection. If you step away from the academic literature and try to get towards some things that are in plain or layman's terms that can be read. I think that Danny Solov has written some wonderful pieces, as has Mark Rothstein at the University of Louisville. I think if you read what they have to say on these matters, it's easy to digest, and I believe it's pretty level-headed.
Well, thank you. As we finish up here, guys, first of all, really a provocative conversation. I knew that one of the biggest challenges of dealing with privacy is it's far-reaching, and oftentimes there are no answers. There's a reality, and then as Brad, I think, eloquently stated, it's a story that's not yet finished. The breadth of what data that we have and the ways that we're able to compute against it and the ways that we're joining it are just fundamentally changing almost hourly. So Alyssa and Hannah have a song called Evil in the Water.
We do.
Yes, you do. I have a feeling it relates to this topic.
Quite a bit, yeah.
Nice segue there, Kevin.
What do you think?
Well, that song, that song is very personal to me in particular, and came from a whole discussion and kind of lifetime in therapy of processing the hidden things that family does, and that is generationally passed down from person to person, especially when you're not allowed to talk about it.
Yeah. Wow.
So it's sort of that idea that lies and fear breed more of the same thing, and just wanting there to be transparency and vulnerability and honesty instead. But in order to do that, you have to at some point decide, I'm going to make this really difficult choice for myself to be the person that decides, okay, I'm going to take one for the team and hopefully help other people start that healing process, and that being able to think of something differently. The ethics question within that is, well, do I tell a specific story so I can call a person out in particular, or do I protect that person because I care about them and their feelings and the rest of their life and their friends and whatever?
Yeah.
Do I tell everyone who it is, or do I write it in a way that it could be you, it could be someone you know?
Well, that does fit in beautifully. I can't wait for everybody to hear it.
The single will be coming out, we're thinking, in September.
Mm-hmm.
So this is one of the first times we've shown it to anybody. Yeah. So
thank you for asking.
Thank you for
I have to say, it took my mood all the way like deep below the basement. It's a little sad, right?
Kind of makes you think.
It might be.
Yeah.
It might be for some people.
It's the kind of stuff that Brad's going to love.
Good.
Perfect.
No.
Down to the well, my child. Keep a wary and a watchful eye. Don't go down to the well, my child. Beware of what may be inside. 'Cause there's evil in the water, and there's no fighting this time. Oh, there's evil in the water, and you could never stay dry. 'cause of you.